肃立，升国旗，唱国歌。
People's Republic of China is the most populous state in the world, with over 1.3 billion people. Established on October 1st of 1949, it is a single-party state governed by the Communist Party of China. The PRC exercises jurisdiction over 22 provinces, 5 autonomous regions, 4 directly administered municipalities, and 2 highly autonomous special administrative regions. Within these regions, there are currently 17.3 million primary school students, 19.2 junior secondary students, and 8.7 million senior secondary students. There's also about 20 million undergraduates and postgrad students in China currently. This makes China the world's largest education system. With over 60 million students enrolled in its system each year, China is producing, at vast quantities, a new generation of Chinese. Within the student's academic career, there are 2 entrance exams. The Senior Secondary Entrance Exam, which ensures the student's entrance into high school, and there is the University Entrance Examination, which is school-specific. It's important to understand that senior secondary schools and higher education are not state-funded. And like the primary schools and junior secondary schools, they are not for free. The government does not ensure higher education for students. This makes it very hard for poor families to afford higher education, as they have to pay for education on their own. Oftentimes, students rely on scholarships or student loans to pay off for high schools and universities. Although there is such a problem, it's important to note that most students in China are offered almost free education for primary and junior secondary education. However, there are a group of students that are left out of this. They're the migrant students, children of migrant workers who left the countryside and moved to urban areas. There is a growing migrant workforce in China today. Currently, it is estimated that there's about 300 million migrant workers in the urban areas. Recently, the government has finally started to enforce the compulsory education laws, as they have finally come up with the funding needed to take measures in improving rural education through bolstering investments in teacher salaries, buildings, and facilities and curriculum reform. The compulsory schooling laws were first established in 1989 as a law of 9-year compulsory education. However, the law has never been truly enforced, as the government lacked the funding to enforce students into schools that lack the capacity of holding such vast numbers. However, migrant workers are not benefiting from any of the improvements in the education system, as they are not part of the system at all. They are neither part of the rural education system nor the part of the urban education system. This is a result of the restrictive hukou system. Migration itself is not fully sanctioned by the government yet. In fact, early in the life of the People's Republic of China, migration was effectively restricted by the hukou household registration system. Implemented in 1958, the hukou household registration system created a clear rural and urban divide. Although the government has rarely enforced the rules against migration since the 1980s, one of the legacies of the hukou system is that the education system did not evolve with the changing dynamics of the labor force. So, without an urban hukou, migrants and their families have had limited access to housing, healthcare, social security, legal advice, and education. In recent years, however, the government has gradually begun to pass laws and design policies to protect the rights of migrants. Migrant children are now allegedly entitled to attend urban schools in their local school districts without cost. There are indications, however, that municipal governments are setting up extensive barriers to restrict migrant students from attending public schools, which in turn leads to the privatization of primary and junior secondary education for migrant students. Thus, we see the rise of migrant schools. Migrant schools are schools that are private schools outside of the government-supported system. These schools often charge around 300 RMB to 450 RMB each semester. This is considered a relatively high cost for education, and it's oftentimes a burden to migrant workers. But that's not the only issue with migrant schools. Migrant schools are plagued with poor teaching, poor facilities, and an unorganized curriculum. Teachers in migrant schools are generally second market, those who do not have adequate credentials or experience to attain jobs in public schools. Many teachers only accept positions at migrant schools to gain experience and resign as soon as they find better work, which can create disruptances for their classes when teachers leave before the end of the school year. Another key reason for why teaching quality is so poor at migrant schools is that they can only afford a very basic cost for teachers. They can only offer very low wages, harsh conditions, very basic food, crude living quarters for a very heavy teaching burden. The quality of facilities at migrant schools varies widely but are mostly poor, especially compared to urban public schools. Migrant schools are often overcrowded and use second-hand desks, chairs, and even buildings bought cheaply from public schools. Many have poor lighting, heating, ventilation, and sanitation, which are often cited as grounds for closing down the schools. A number of schools don't even have drinking water, restrooms, and student grounds. Principals and entrepreneurs that run the migrant schools usually avoid long-term investments in facilities because they fear being closed down or simply because hefty investments are not profitable. The curriculum also poses a huge problem for migrant schools. There is no set standard for the curriculum, and individual schools can choose among the different systems, the national curriculum, or the Beijing curriculum used in Beijing public schools, or the various other curricula used in migrants' provinces of origin. However, one thing must be noted: students must return to their rural hometowns to take the high school and college entrance exams, which will be based on the curriculum used in that province and not necessarily the one that they are living in.
To solve the migrant schooling issue, the government must intervene. There are two routes of approach. The first being the government supporting the establishment and operation of migrant schools through funding and better resource allocation. The other being the elimination of barriers for migrant students to enter public schools. These include the establishment of a uniform national curriculum, senior secondary entrance exams localized to migrant students, and open public school locations convenient for migrant students. However, one other approach is to ensure migrant status through government-sanctioned migration and the elimination of the hukou system. By doing this, the government grants equal rights and privileges to migrant students in all areas of social security. If migrant schooling issues are not addressed, China will see nearly one-third of its future generation poorly educated and disadvantaged relative to the rest of society. This will create a spiral of poverty, which in turn will keep migrants at the bottom of society and forever the exploited labor force.
I was a little girl alone in my little world who dreamed of a little home for me. I played pretend between the trees and fed my house scarce sparkling leaves and laughed